Hey guys, this is RolloutReviews with RolloutReviews, bringing you an SH Monsterarts review. This time it is Godzilla from the 2014 movie. Now, I have never been a huge fan of Godzilla, but I really loved this new movie and wanted the titular King of Monsters in my collection. I wasn't quite happy enough with the way the NECA figure looked, so the moment this went up, I pre-ordered it, and here it is now. This is my first SH Monsterarts, so let's see how it fares. Taking a look at the packaging first, it's extremely large for what you get inside. I'm sure it's all so that the tail doesn't get bent up in the packaging. There's the front, the sides. I really like the slashes there. Look super cool. Shot of the figure there, and a couple more shots of the figure on the back. But that is about it. So, let's take a look at what you get inside. Now, unfortunately, this guy does not come with any add-ons or effect parts. What you see is what you get. It would have been nice to see some blue atomic breath here, but all the same, I'm not necessarily disappointed, because I probably wouldn't have displayed him with that atomic breath all that often anyway. I'm fairly content with what I have here, as is. Now, like I said, this is my first SH Monsterarts. I'm not entirely sure what I expected, but I don't think it was quite this, and it's all because of the materials he's made out of. Sort of a very rubbery plastic, all covered in a layer of paint, and it makes for a really weird texture on this guy, but it also allows for some amazing detail. Just looks incredible, all the little nooks and crannies in this guy. Another interesting thing is that he's entirely 100% asymmetrical. This piece here is not the same as this piece here. All the details are completely unique on all of his pieces, and I think that alone is super, super cool. His tail back here is interesting, the way they decided to approach it. The NECA figure was just a rubber tail with a wire in it. This time, it's got all these segments here. I'm not exactly sure what the joint work is like underneath there. I can only assume it's probably ball joints, but it allows for some really, really natural movement, and it looks really cool and is fairly seamless, all things considered. Unfortunately, it doesn't do all that much for the structure of his tail, because in a lot of poses, it will droop under its own weight, which is unfortunate, but I'll probably have it resting on the ground anyway in most cases. Most of the gaps are covered up by panels or just by the way the pieces are molded, but there are a couple gaps between his legs. Fortunately, those are the only ones I can really find. Maybe this one back here, but that's kind of stretching it a little bit. I think for the most part, he's pretty, I wouldn't say seamless, but most of the joint work is covered up very nicely. Now, some people were worried about his head sculpt. I'll say I think it is much better than the NECA version, but it's still not perfect. There just seems to be something a little bit off. Some people were complaining about the quality control on his teeth, and once again, it's not spot on. It is a little bit messy, but on mine at least it's not too bad. You might want to watch out for that though, because I have seen some pictures of some pretty dodgy paint on the teeth. Also, I've seen pictures of his eyes looking in cockeyed directions. Mine's pretty good. He's not looking straight forward, but both of his eyes are looking in the same direction, sort of down and to the right, if you look hard enough. So that's fine. Now, he actually does have a tongue molded on the inside of his mouth there, and it actually has a little bit of articulation. It's on a tiny little ball joint. But I don't know, there's just something about the way his mouth opens that doesn't seem entirely right and entirely accurate to the movie, but I can't really put my finger on it as to what. All of his spines here, once again, are kind of a rubbery plastic, but they're also very sharp. It's kind of a strange tolerance there. Overall, I think he looks really, really good. The paint application, all the details are super, super in-depth, like I said, and he really looks great on the shelf. Now, the execution of this figure's articulation also came as a little bit of a surprise, something new. It's very complex, but it doesn't get a whole lot done. I mean, it's very impressive for what it does get done, but you'll see what I mean. Like, there's a lot of complex engineering here, but it's less for giving him an incredible range and more for making sure all of his joints are tidied up. There's also kind of a third step when posing him. With SH Figuarts, you pose it in a way you like and set it on the shelf. With this, you kind of have to pose it in a position that you're happy with and then kind of fiddle with things to make sure everything's covered back up in the end. Super interesting. But his head goes up pretty far. There's a series of joints inside there, and a series of panels and things. He can get his head up about this far. There's also a little bit of rotation on these two segments here, but unfortunately, you can't really get him in the roaring pose he gets into at the end of the movie. It's just not quite there. Also, I do find the ball joints inside there kind of come out of the joints a little bit sometimes and will create like gaps here. But once again, you kind of have to just like snap them back in and hope for the best. His mouth opens pretty far, and like I said, he also has a little bit of articulation in his tongue, but you kind of have to jam a toothpick underneath there or something to get it up, and it sort of looks silly in the end. There's another joint here, which is very subtle, and then he has this waist joint, which can rotate just a tiny, tiny bit, but it's mostly for moving forward and back. Now, it covers up a bit of detail in the front there, but I love how this little tiny piece here is exposed, so that when you bring this forward, the sculpt is not disturbed, and it kind of completes this spike here. So whether it's like this or like this, it doesn't look bad. You also have a little bit of movement in this secondary joint, but that's mostly for rotation, albeit not very much. Now his arms have the joints in his shoulders very internally set, once again. So they go out pretty far. Well, there you go. There you can see it's like a double ball joint. Anyway, they go out pretty far, but the joint is completely hidden. Similar thing here on his elbow. Bends about 90 degrees, but looks pretty seamless overall. You have joints in his wrists, and they rotate as well. Now his legs have an incredibly impressive range, at least in the hips here. They go in about that far. This middle piece here is made of rubber, so that it's pretty malleable and will get out of the way. But bringing them out, it goes about that far, which is pretty cool. There's some extended molding there to keep it seamless. Unfortunately, if you bring it out too far, it starts getting a little bit gappy. His legs go up that far, back that far. It's really, really cool, and like the way the molding is there is pretty nice. His tail is on this joint that in some ways can be a little bit ugly. Like it'll create this big gap here, and you kind of have to like cover it back up. It's a little bit of a chore, but nothing too bad. Now his knees, they bend on a similar joint to his elbows and quite far, a little bit less than 90 degrees, but that's more than I'd expect, honestly. His ankles are on really nice joints. There's actually like a segment here with one joint up here and a second joint up there, so we can get some pretty wide stances without too much trouble. Now this joint here is probably like my least favorite just because of that gappiness. It's a double ball joint inside there. This figure really likes double ball joints. Well, case in point, I must not have pegged that in quite well, but it's also like very tight on the second joint, so I don't know, you can bring this up like this, you can bring it down. This rubber piece here, if I expose it, you can see it creates this big gap, and you kind of have to either bring it down over or bring it down under that piece, like this, to make it look good. But no matter what you do with it, this is probably the most annoying part about this figure. And from there, the tail is super crazy. Like, it goes any which way you want it to. This way, that way, up, down. Really expressive, but like I said, unfortunately, it doesn't quite hold itself up all that well. So you're going to have to work with that however you may. Maybe put it on a Tamashii stage and have him swing his tail at a Muto or something. I wonder if they'll make an SH Monsterarts Muto. I wonder. Anyway, you can see how that is. I kind of have to pull this off sometimes to get it to work properly, which is realistically like a con, but doesn't bother me all that much. Overall, his articulation is impressive for what it's worth, but ultimately flawed. I don't know how this translates on other SH Monsterarts. Like I said, this is my first one. I'm not sure if this is just how SH Monsterarts work, but it's really kind of weird. An interesting experience. Not necessarily a con, but something I suppose I'm not quite used to yet. Now, don't get me wrong, I love this figure. It is an absolutely stunning looking shelf piece. But that's really it. It's a shelf piece. It's very evident that this isn't quite a toy. If you're looking for a Godzilla to play with, to mess around with, to pose often, you might want to look at the NECA figure. Now, personally, I think this figure looks so much better than the NECA figure, and that is the reason I passed on that and got this instead. That said, I don't have the two side by side. Maybe the NECA figure is built better, but this one is much more impressive just sitting there on the shelf, I think. It all really comes down to the price, because this figure is more than twice the price of the NECA version. I think you definitely get what you pay for, but you also miss out on the solidity and toy-like feel that I get the impression the NECA figure has. I really do think there are two groups of people. One group of people who are going to want this figure, and another group of people who are more than willing to settle for the NECA version. So, it's really up to you to decide which of those two groups you fall into. But I definitely fall into the group that enjoys this figure a lot more, so I went for it and was willing to pay the price. And, well, like I said, that's really all it comes down to. So that is about it, guys, and this is IX Roll It IX, signing off.